Imagine locking your closest friends in a room, sitting them down, and just forcing them to listen to you read out loud for 17 hours straight.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds like a complete nightmare.
Right. No intermissions, like no meaningful breaks at all, just a grueling, non-stop marathon of your own writing.
I mean, I would lose my mind.
Exactly. A dizzying parade of, theological fever dreams, historical hallucinations, and just dense philosophical despair. And that is exactly what the French author Gustave Flaubert did in the year 1849.
It's an unimaginable demand to place on an audience, let alone your dearest confidants.
Yeah.
By the end of those 17 hours, the sheer physical and mental exhaustion in that room must have been suffocating.
Suffocating is literally the perfect word for it. So Flaubert finally finishes the last page of this massive, sprawling manuscript. He's breathless, right?
Right.
He looks up at his friends, expecting them to just be completely blown away. He's waiting for them to tell him that he has birthed this literary masterpiece that will alter the course of human history.
And let me guess, they did not say that.
Not even close. The room is dead silent. Finally, one of his friends looks him dead in the eye and brutally says, "You should put this in the fire and we will never speak of it again."
Ouch. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
Which is the kind of feedback that would break almost anyone else,
Oh, absolutely.
A normal writer would be utterly devastated. They would incinerate the manuscript out of sheer shame, bury the ashes, and pivot to something safe.
Just pretend it never happened.
Exactly. And, on the surface, Flaubert did pivot. He shelved the manuscript and went on to write Madame Bovary, which is the book that would ultimately cement his legacy as a titan of literature.
Right, everyone knows Madame Bovary.
But underneath that success, he never actually let this first project go.
He absolutely refused to let it die. It became this, lifelong, agonizing obsession for him.
Yeah, he just couldn't shake it.
Before almost every subsequent novel he ever wrote, he would drag this manuscript back out, take another stab at fixing it, revising it, wrestling with its demons.
That's wild.
And the text we are diving into today for this deep dive, The Temptation of St. Anthony, is the culmination of that decades-long psychological marathon.
And I love that it completely shatters that romanticized image we all have of the isolated genius. The guy who just wrestles with his muse for a few months and emerges with a flawless, tidy masterpiece.
Yeah, no, this is a man being completely consumed by his own creation.
And when you finally open the text, you immediately understand why his friends were so overwhelmed and why Flaubert himself was so obsessed. Because, and this is key, this is not a conventional narrative.
Not at all.
We are not looking at a simple story with a clear beginning, middle, and end.
So how do we even categorize it?
Well, the philosopher Michel Foucault provides an incredibly useful framework for understanding what Flaubert built here. Foucault calls The Temptation of St. Anthony an index novel.
That concept completely changed how I read this.
It's brilliant, really. If you think about a traditional encyclopedic novel, something like Herman Melville's Moby Dick, that book points outward to the physical world, right?
Yeah. Right. It's got, everything you'd ever want to know about whales.
Exactly. The anatomy of the whale, the nautical ropes, the ship's architecture. It is an encyclopedia of a physical profession. But Foucault argues that Flaubert's text does the exact opposite.
It points inward.
It doesn't point to the physical world at all. It points to a library. It is fundamentally a book that is dreaming about other books.
A book dreaming about other books. It's such a haunting image.
It really is.
Foucault describes it as this space that recovers existing books, hides them, displays them, and in a single sweeping movement causes them to glitter and disappear.
Which is just a gorgeous way to phrase it.
So Flaubert isn't just making up a fantasy world with dragons and wizards. He is meticulously pulling from ancient texts, forgotten myths, historical artifacts, and bizarre theological treatises.
And then reassembling them into this overwhelming rapid-fire parade. He's essentially transcribing the strangest, most contradictory elements of human history into a single fever dream.
Okay, so you listening to this deep dive right now might be asking yourself, why should I care about a 19th century French author's obsession with a 3rd century Egyptian monk? What does this have to do with me?
It's a fair question.
Right. But think about this. Have you ever found yourself completely paralyzed by information overload?
Oh, constantly.
You know the exact feeling. It's 3 in the morning. You started by looking up, I don't know, a simple fact on Wikipedia, and 3 hours later, you have gone down a massive rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, clicking from medieval history to philosophy to quantum physics.
To obscure internet subcultures.
Yeah.
Exactly. And suddenly you hit this wall.
Yeah, that wall of just too much.
The sheer volume of competing ideas of thousands of voices all screaming they have the answer makes the very concept of truth feel entirely meaningless. You feel incredibly small, overwhelmed, and completely detached from your own reality.
And that specific modern vertigo, that feeling of the mind collapsing under the weight of too much information, is the exact psychological state Flaubert is capturing here. The modern reader can deeply relate to St. Anthony's journey because Anthony is essentially experiencing the ultimate weaponized version of information fatigue.
Exactly. So let's drop right into the desert and set the scene, because the physical environment here is crucial.
No, it's the foundation of everything that happens.
We are in the Thebaid, which is a rocky, desolate plateau in the Egyptian desert. It's the 3rd century. St. Anthony is an ascetic monk. He has completely isolated himself.
And he is not doing well.
Understatement. He is starving, he is dehydrated, he is wrapped in a tattered goat skin, and as the text opens, he is rapidly losing his grip on reality.
Flaubert paints this environment as intensely, almost violently oppressive.
Yeah, the sensory details are wild.
The sky takes on these strange pearl gray and purple tints. The earth feels as hard as bronze beneath Anthony's feet. There is a fine golden dust constantly vibrating in the blinding light.
It just sounds miserable.
It is an environment engineered to offer absolutely zero comfort, but of course that is the entire point of the ascetic philosophy, right?
Right, the suffering is the point.
Anthony has retreated to this wasteland specifically to deny his flesh, to punish his physical body so severely that his soul might detach from the material world and elevate to God.
But the text immediately begins to deconstruct that philosophy, like right out of the gate.
Oh yeah, Flaubert wastes no time.
The opening movement of Anthony's Temptation focuses heavily on the architecture of physical desire. And it exposes the complete failure of this extreme asceticism.
Because of how the brain works.
Exactly. Let's think about the mechanics of the human mind here. What actually happens when you actively, aggressively try to deny yourself a physical desire?
It creates a violent slingshot effect.
Right.
By attempting to completely suppress the flesh, Anthony inadvertently forces his mind to hyper-focus upon it. He sits in the silent desert, but his mind is roaring.
What's he thinking about?
He remembers the women he left behind. He remembers the bustling, overwhelming sensory overload of the city of Alexandria.
And as his physical weakness reaches its absolute peak, his brain just starts trying to fill the sensory vacuum.
Yep, the hallucinations begin.
And Flaubert introduces the devil in such a subtle, brilliant way here. It's not a dramatic explosion of sulfur or something cheesy like that.
No, it's so much more psychological.
The text describes a shadow appearing on the ground. A shadow cast by the arms of Anthony's own wooden cross.
Which is such a powerful image.
It really is. But then slowly, the shadow lengthens, and 2 horns suddenly emerge from it. The devil is literally a shadow cast by Anthony's own instrument of faith, and nesting under the devil's wings like a giant grotesque bat are the 7 deadly sins.
And the implication of the shadow being cast by the cross is profound.
Because it means it's coming from him.
Exactly. It suggests that the evil torturing Anthony isn't some external monster that flew into the desert to bother him. It is an internally generated phenomenon. The temptation is the unavoidable shadow of his own extreme rigidity.
And the sensory details of these hallucinations are just wild. They're so incredibly visceral. Like Anthony is literally starving to death, right? So suddenly, a massive, impossible table appears right in front of him in the dirt. But it's not just, a humble loaf of bread to keep him alive.
Oh no, it's never that simple.
It's an apocalyptic phantom banquet. There's a smoking wild boar, massive quarters of dripping red meat, giant fish, dishes of whipped cream that look as light as clouds.
Just reading it makes you hungry.
And wines just overflowing and spilling over the edges of the table. Flaubert even describes the pulp of the fruit protruding like amorous lips.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, he is intentionally layering this desperate gluttony with intense eroticism.
Because in the ascetic mind, all physical pleasures, eating, drinking, sex, are tangled together in the same forbidden knot of material indulgence.
That makes a lot of sense.
And the hallucinations don't stop at sustenance, they escalate to wealth. Anthony is wandering the rocks and stumbles upon what looks like a simple, lost cup.
Just a cup in the dirt.
Yeah, but he picks it up, rubs the dirt off, and realizes it's solid gold. Suddenly, the cup is magically overflowing.
Of course it is.
It's pouring out coins bearing the effigies of ancient conquerors, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar. Diamonds, carbuncles, and sapphires pour out in a never-ending, glittering stream.
And he fantasizes about plunging his arms into the gold, like a farmer plunging his hands into sacks of grain.
Just rolling in it.
He wants to rub his face in it. It's this pure, unfiltered, tactile greed. But what I find even more fascinating than the gluttony or the greed are the fantasies of power and vengeance.
The vengeance part is so interesting.
Right, because Anthony is a pious man, supposedly full of Christian love, but underneath that, he is deeply, deeply resentful.
Well, resentment is the hidden poison of the ascetic life, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
When you suffer voluntarily, there's a very human tendency to become enraged at those who are not suffering.
Yes, and we see that rage explode. Anthony hallucinates going back to the city of Alexandria with a massive, violent army of monks.
Just taking over the city.
And he fantasizes about absolutely slaughtering his theological enemies, this group known as the Arians. He imagines wading knee-deep in their blood through the streets.
Which is pretty intense for a holy man.
Very. And to give some context here for the listener, the Arians were a massive faction in early Christianity who disagreed with the Orthodox view on the nature of the Trinity.
Right. It was a huge debate at the time.
Yeah, it was a dense theological debate about whether Jesus was co-eternal with God or created by God. But to Anthony, this isn't just a polite debate. This is a blood feud.
He takes it very personally.
He revels in a hallucination where he watches the fathers of the Council of Nicaea, the Orthodox leaders, being degraded to the status of slaves, cleaning out stables.
The specificity of that fantasy is really telling. He doesn't just want his theology to win, he wants the people who disagree with him to be humiliated and physically destroyed.
And then his ego inflates even further. He fantasizes about sitting beside the Emperor Constantine, wielding the power of the state.
He's just running the empire.
And then he jumps completely out of Christian history and actually becomes King Nebuchadnezzar from the Old Testament.
That is quite the leap.
He imagines himself gorging at a massive decadent banquet, while captive kings, men who have had their hands and feet severed, are forced to crawl on the floor below him, eating his scraps.
So what Flaubert is exposing here is the psychological mechanics of repression.
Exactly.
Anthony has built his entire identity on the foundation of rejecting the world. Later in the text, the devil will explicitly mock him for this.
How so?
Well, the devil points out the bitter irony that Anthony's own mind is providing him with the exact banquets, the exact women, and the exact imperial power that his physical body has been strictly denied.
So the isolation backfired.
Completely. His isolation hasn't purified him. It has turned his subconscious into a pressure cooker of unfulfilled, monstrous desires.
You know, it makes me think of a very modern cultural phenomenon. It's exactly like when someone decides they're going to go on a severe dopamine detox.
Oh, yeah. I see where you're going with this.
Right, like they lock their smartphone in a time safe. They cut out all sugar, caffeine, and processed food. They swear off all Netflix and video games.
Just go in full monk mode.
Exactly. They are aiming for this state of pure, monk-like productivity and mental clarity. But what actually happens on day 3?
You're hallucinating a donut.
You find yourself lying awake in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, and you are dreaming exclusively about eating an entire pizza and scrolling through endless, mindless social media feeds.
Yep.
The very act of extreme restriction makes the restricted thing the only thing your brain can process.
That analogy perfectly maps onto Anthony's situation. The modern digital ascetic and the 3rd century desert ascetic are fighting the exact same neurological battle.
It's just human nature.
When you aggressively starve the brain of input, it will aggressively manufacture its own input to compensate.
Which brings us to a crucial interpretive question regarding this entire ordeal.
Okay, lay it on me.
Are we, the readers, supposed to believe we are witnessing the literal supernatural intervention of the devil? Or is Flaubert providing us with a brilliant, centuries-early psychological diagnosis of sensory deprivation and religious fanaticism?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
I really lean toward the psychological reading.
Right.
I mean, I don't think we need a supernatural devil to explain this.
Given his physical state, yeah.
Right. Think about Anthony's physical state. He is starving. He is severely dehydrated in a scorching desert. And he is physically mutilating himself.
It's brutal.
In the text, he whips his own back with metal hooks until his blood literally spurts onto the rocks.
Yeah, that's gonna do some damage.
If you subject a human brain to that level of extreme trauma, exhaustion, and deprivation, it is absolutely going to produce hallucinatory banquets and phantom gold.
It's basically guaranteed.
It feels like Flaubert is suggesting that the devil is simply the name that religious ascetics gave to the suppressed shadow self of the human psyche when it finally breaks out of his cage.
Well, Flaubert intentionally plays with that ambiguity. As we noted, the demonic shadow is cast by the cross itself.
Right.
But Flaubert continually escalates the spectacle, pushing the boundaries of what might just be a simple hallucination.
He really dials it out.
He does. The physical temptations finally culminate in the grand arrival of the Queen of Sheba.
Oh, the Queen of Sheba sequence is just a masterclass in descriptive writing. She doesn't just walk in, she arrives on a massive white elephant caught in a golden net.
Subtle.
Very. She is wearing a dress of gold brocade adorned with diamond scorpions, and she offers Anthony absolutely everything a human being could want.
Endless wealth, unstoppable armies.
And even magical artifacts like a shield supposedly made of dragon skin. But what truly fascinated me was her strategy for seducing him.
It's very clever. She doesn't rely solely on awe and majesty.
Exactly. She realizes that presenting herself as an untouchable, idealized goddess won't work on a man who hates the world.
So she pivots.
So she tries to make herself seem more real, more grounded, more intimately attainable. She points out her own physical flaws.
Like what?
She draws his attention to a natural brown spot on her cheek. She breathes heavily, complaining that her corset is laced too tight, emphasizing her physical, flesh and blood reality.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And then she delivers this incredible line, telling him, "I am not a woman, I am a world."
It is the ultimate temptation of total, immersive physical experience.
Yep.
She is offering to be an entire universe of sensory input for a man who has lived in a sensory vacuum.
It's so tempting.
Yet, despite how overwhelming and meticulously crafted this temptation is, Anthony resists. He physically pushes her away.
He rejects the Queen of Sheba, he rejects the gold, he kicks away the phantom banquet.
And this rejection serves as a pivotal structural moment in Flaubert's narrative.
Why is that?
Because why does Anthony survive this? These physical temptations, lust, gluttony, wealth, political power, these are the traditional expected temptations for an ascetic.
It's what he trained for.
Exactly. This is the exact curriculum he has been studying for decades. Anthony has spent his entire adult life training in the desert to fight these specific battles.
He's like a pro athlete of denial.
Yes, he knows exactly how to cross himself, close his eyes, and endure the pangs of hunger or the visions of gold. He is practically immunized against physical temptation.
Right. You cannot tempt a world-class professional ascetic with a phantom piece of meat or a beautiful woman. That's his home turf. He knows how to win that fight.
Precisely. So if the entity tormenting him, whether that is the literal devil or his own fractured psyche, wants to truly break a philosopher's saint, it realizes it must completely change tactics.
It has to try something new.
It has to abandon the battlefield of the physical body and pivot entirely to the battlefield of the intellect. It must stop attacking Anthony's flesh, which he already hates, and start dismantling his mind, which is his only refuge.
And this shift is where the text goes from being a vivid historical drama to a deeply unsettling psychological thriller.
The tone completely changes.
The tempter changes form. The extravagant Queen of Sheba vanishes, and in her place stands a young, unassuming man named Hilarion.
Hilarion is arguably the most fascinating figure in the entire text. He doesn't appear as a terrifying monster.
No, he's just a guy.
He appears as a memory. Hilarion was a former teenage disciple of Anthony. He was someone Anthony loved like a son, a bright-eyed student who used to follow the monk around, asking him incessant, eager questions about faith and scripture.
But he's different now.
Very different. The Hilarion who appears in this vision has a fundamentally different demeanor. The boyish curiosity is gone. He speaks with an icy, penetrating, clinical tone.
So what does he represent?
Hilarion is the personification of reason, of empirical science, and of relentless intellectual critique.
And Flaubert gives Hilarion this deeply unsettling, terrifying physical characteristic.
Oh, the growing.
Yes. As Hilarion and Anthony talk, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Hilarion begins to grow taller. His physical stature literally increases word by word, argument by argument, as he steadily wears down Anthony's defensive faith.
That physical growth is a masterstroke of metaphor. It perfectly represents the creeping, expanding nature of intellectual doubt.
Because it starts small, right?
Exactly. When a logical inconsistency is introduced into a rigid, fundamentalist belief system, it doesn't just sit there quietly, it takes root.
And it spreads.
It grows, it expands, and it eventually overshadows everything else in the mind until the original belief is dwarfed by the contradiction.
So Hilarion begins the process of dismantling Anthony, and he uses pure surgical logic to do it. He doesn't offer Anthony a banquet or gold, he offers him an argument.
He attacks the premises.
He looks around at Anthony's miserable, starving, pathetic life in the dirt, and essentially asks, why are you doing this? Hilarion argues that Anthony's extreme asceticism is not holy at all. He says it is actually just a subtle form of corruption.
Wow.
He points out that Anthony's loud, performative contempt for the world is really just the impotence of hatred.
It's a devastating psychological read.
It really is.
Hilarion is saying, you don't hate the world because you are incredibly holy, Anthony. You hate the world because you cannot control it.
Ouch.
You retreated to the desert because the complexity of human society was too much for you. Your fasting and your self-flagellation are just mechanisms to make yourself feel superior to the people who are actually out there living life.
And then Hilarion pivots to a profound theological critique. He challenges the very core of Anthony's understanding of God. He tells the monk, "Thy God is not a Moloch who demands human flesh and sacrifice."
And to understand the weight of that line, we have to look at the concept of Moloch.
Right, who was Moloch?
In the ancient world, Moloch was a Canaanite deity associated with horrific child sacrifice, with demanding the destruction of human life to appease his wrath.
Not exactly a loving father figure.
Exactly. Hilarion is challenging the underlying premise of Anthony's suffering. He is asking a deeply modern question.
Which is?
If the God you worship is entirely good, entirely perfect, and entirely loving, why would he require a man to sit in a barren desert and rip his own skin open with metal hooks?
Right, what kind of God wants that?
Does the supreme creator of the infinite universe actually derive pleasure from your dehydration and your open infected wounds?
It's an argument that completely anticipates the post-Enlightenment critique of religion.
Oh, for sure.
Hilarion embodies that rationalist, modern perspective. He tells Anthony that ignorance is the foam of pride. He argues that when Anthony says, "My conviction is formed, wherefore argue further," he isn't demonstrating strong faith.
He's demonstrating intellectual cowardice.
Yes, Hilarion pushes Anthony to stop hiding in a dark cave, to stop talking only to himself, and to seek actual truth by communicating with the broader world.
And Hilarion doesn't stop there. He strikes at the very heart of the early Christian value system by deconstructing the concept of martyrdom.
Because martyrs were everything to them.
For Anthony, the martyrs, the early Christians who were thrown to the lions in the Roman Colosseum or burned at the stake, are the ultimate heroes. Their willingness to die is, for Anthony, the absolute proof that their beliefs are true.
But Hilarion totally dismantles that logic. He asks Anthony, how does dying for a cause prove that the specific doctrine of that cause is objectively true?
Right, because people die for all sorts of things.
Hilarion points out a very uncomfortable historical fact. He reminds Anthony that heretics, people who hold beliefs that Anthony considers absolutely blasphemous and wrong, they die for their heterodoxy just as bravely and sometimes even more nobly than the Orthodox believers do.
It's a huge problem for Anthony's worldview.
If a heretic is willing to be burned alive for a false belief, then the willingness to suffer doesn't prove cosmic truth. It only proves human stubbornness.
It's a flawless logical trap. Hilarion is forcing Anthony to realize that intensity of belief does not equal accuracy of belief.
You know, this dynamic reminds me of that one relentlessly logical friend we all seem to have.
Oh, we all have one.
You know the type. The
Yeah.
one who plays devil's advocate so incredibly well that you can walk away from a casual coffee date deeply questioning your own core values and life choices.
You're just staring at your latte like, who am I?
Yes. You start the conversation entirely secure in your worldview, and by the end of it, they have used your own premises, your own logic, to completely corner you.
And looking at the broader philosophical arc of the novel, Flaubert is using this dialogue to map a massive shift in human consciousness.
How so?
Well, St. Anthony represents the medieval faith-based worldview. In that paradigm, truth is revealed top-down through scripture, and it is validated by personal, physical suffering.
And Hilarion is the opposite.
Hilarion represents the dawn of rationalism and the Enlightenment. In his paradigm, truth must be empirically verified, logically consistent, and open to debate.
So how on earth does Anthony handle this kind of intellectual assault? Because when the temptation was a physical gold cup, he could just throw it into the canyon.
Right, easy fix.
When it was a phantom woman, he could squeeze his eyes shut and pray. But you cannot fight logic with a fast.
Fasting doesn't cure a paradox.
Exactly. If someone presents a glaring rational paradox in your theology, hitting yourself with a whip does not resolve the paradox. It's still there. What is Anthony's defense mechanism here?
His initial defense is regression. He tries to simply shut the logic out. He literally covers his ears with his hands.
It's going la la, can't hear you.
Pretty much. He begs Hilarion to stop talking. But Hilarion coldly points out a fundamental truth about human consciousness. You cannot unthink a thought.
Once it's in there, it's in there.
Once the contradiction is seen, it cannot be unseen. Anthony is eventually forced to admit that these doubts are always lurking in his conscience. He says that even when he thinks he has crushed them, they rise up again and stifle him.
He is drowning in his own intellect.
Exactly. But Hilarion knows that pure rhetoric, pure argument, isn't enough to break Anthony entirely.
Because he could still just be stubborn.
Right. A man can still stubbornly cling to faith even when logic fails him. To truly shatter Anthony's worldview, Hilarion needs to provide empirical evidence. He needs to move from theory to demonstration.
He needs to show his work.
He needs to show Anthony the overwhelming, terrifying diversity of human thought.
Which opens the door to the most dizzying sequence in the entire book. We enter the library of heresies.
This part is wild.
Hilarion doesn't just talk about other beliefs. He transports Anthony to a massive spectral basilica. And inside this impossible building is a gathering of all the 3rd century heresiarchs.
And who were they?
These are the historical leaders of the various early Christian sects whose specific doctrines were eventually rejected, outvoted, or suppressed by what became the Orthodox Church.
And this is where Foucault's concept of the index novel becomes incredibly literal.
Because these are real books, real beliefs.
Flaubert did not just invent a bunch of crazy, spooky cults to scare his protagonists. That would be too easy. Instead, Flaubert spent years doing grueling historical research.
He really did his homework.
He meticulously read ancient theological texts, church histories, and the writings of the early church fathers who documented these sects. Every bizarre, surreal doctrine Anthony encounters in this basilica was a real belief.
That is mind-blowing.
These were ideas held by real human beings who lived, organized communities, fought, and often died for their specific, highly localized version of the truth.
The sheer variety of beliefs they throw at Anthony is staggering to listen to. For example, we meet Maines, the historical founder of Manichaeism.
Oh, Maines is a trip.
Maines approaches Anthony and explains his cosmology. He tells Anthony that the universe is a dualistic battleground and that pure divine light is literally imprisoned inside physical matter.
Okay, so far kind of standard dualism.
But wait, he believes that when you die, your soul travels to the moon to be purified before finally rising to the sun.
The moon!
Yeah, and it gets so specific. Maines literally tells Anthony that because life is trapped in matter, if you plant a vine in the ground, your soul becomes spiritually bound to its boughs.
Wow, it's a cosmology that views the entire physical world as a tragic trap.
And then we meet Valentinus, representing a form of Gnosticism.
What's his angle?
Valentinus argues that the physical world wasn't created by a perfect, loving God at all. He claims it was the work of a demiurge, a god in delirium, a flawed, ignorant, or perhaps even malevolent lower deity who botched the creation of the world.
Imagine Anthony, who believes the creator is perfect, hearing someone confidently assert that God was basically having a manic episode when he made the earth.
It would completely break his brain.
It's a barrage of contradictory epistemologies.
And then we see a group called the Ebionites. Flaubert describes them as withered old men. They claim that they are the ones who hold the real truth because they actually knew Jesus personally.
Oh, this is the part about the mudbirds.
Yes, but they don't know him as the divine savior of the cosmos. They claim they knew him just as a regular kid in their neighborhood, a boy who used to amuse himself by making little mudbirds.
They are stripping away the supernatural entirely.
And leaving only a mundane historical human.
But Flaubert saves the most visceral, shocking heresy for last. The scene with the Ophites.
Yes. This is the most intense moment in the basilica. The Ophites step forward, they bring out a large basket, and from it, a massive, heavy python emerges.
A literal snake.
The snake slithers out, its coils filling the room, and it wraps itself around a communion loaf. These believers, actually worship the serpent.
Which is the ultimate inversion of Christianity.
Their theology is a complete inversion of the book of Genesis. They claim that the serpent in the Garden of Eden wasn't the devil. The serpent was the true hero.
The bringer of knowledge.
Exactly. They say the snake was trying to free Adam and Eve from the oppressive, tyrannical God of Israel who wanted to keep humanity ignorant and blind. They let the snake literally bite the communion bread, and then they frenetically fight over the pieces to eat them.
The psychological horror of this specific section cannot be overstated.
It's terrifying.
Flaubert is intentionally forcing Anthony, and by extension the reader, to confront the absolute terror of epistemological relativism. Think about Anthony's life. He has based his entire agonizing existence, every hunger pang, every drop of blood he has spilled from whipping himself, on the absolute certainty that he possesses the one singular, exclusive truth, the orthodox doctrine.
And suddenly he is trapped in a room with thousands of people who are just as fiercely convicted, just as passionate, and just as willing to suffer for their truths as he is for his.
And their truths are mutually exclusive.
It completely destabilizes the concept of truth with a capital T.
It really does.
If you look at the exact same universe or even the exact same scripture, and 1,000 different groups come away with 1,000 wildly different, violently opposed interpretations, how can you possibly maintain the arrogance to believe that your specific, localized interpretation is the only correct one?
This raises a fundamental question about the nature of temptation itself in this novel.
Because this doesn't look like temptation.
Right. In the earlier scenes, the temptation was obvious. It was a lure toward traditional sin, gluttony, lust, anger. But here in the Basilica, the temptation is far more subversive and far more dangerous.
I really want to pause and look at the narrative structure here, because I have to ask, are these heresiarchs actually tempting Anthony to sin in any traditional sense?
They aren't offering him pleasure or power.
Right. They're just standing there, stating their beliefs. It feels like the temptation isn't a sin at all. The temptation is just historical fact. These people existed.
Yeah.
Is the truth of human diversity itself the temptation? Is Anthony just terrified to acknowledge them because their very existence threatens to collapse his entire worldview?
That is exactly the philosophical trap that Hilarion has set. The temptation here is the temptation to doubt the absolute nature of your own reality.
That is so deep.
Hilarion is tempting Anthony with the reality of human diversity. By exposing Anthony to the sheer volume of alternative religious beliefs, Hilarion is forcefully demonstrating that Anthony's Orthodox faith is not a universal given.
It's not the default.
It is not the default state of the cosmos. It is merely one localized historical choice among thousands of other choices. The true horror for Anthony isn't that these heresiarchs are evil cartoon villains. The horror is that they are entirely sincere.
It's the terrifying realization that your entire reality, your entire moral framework, is just a fragile construct.
And Hilarion is just getting started.
Right. Hilarion doesn't let up. After exhausting the Christian heresies, Hilarion realizes that Anthony is severely wavering. His mind is bleeding, but he is still clinging by his fingernails to the broader concept of a monotheistic God.
So Hilarion zooms out.
So Hilarion decides to widen the scope even further. He takes Anthony out of the Christian basilica entirely and plunges him into the graveyard of all human mythologies.
This is widely considered one of the most conceptually breathtaking and ambitious sequences in 19th century literature.
It's massive.
Hilarion summons a massive chronological panorama of the ancient deities. He essentially forces Anthony to sit and watch a time-lapse of the birth, the absolute peak of power, and the inevitable pathetic decay of the gods of Egypt, India, Chaldea, Greece, and Babylon.
And again, Flaubert is weaponizing history against faith. One of the most striking moments is when the Buddha appears.
The parallels there are incredible.
The Buddha calmly recounts his life story to Anthony. And as the Buddha speaks, Anthony listens with growing, absolute horror, because the story is eerily parallel to the story of Jesus Christ.
It's almost the exact same beat sheet.
The Buddha describes a miraculous divine birth. He describes amazing the scholars and priests in the temples when he was just a child. He describes rejecting a kingdom, retreating to the wilderness to fast and face demons, and finally achieving enlightenment to deliver a message of salvation to the world.
And Flaubert twists the knife here, having Hilarion sarcastically whisper biblical quotes into Anthony's ear while the Buddha speaks, highlighting the undeniable similarities.
Flaubert is introducing Anthony to the concept of syncretism.
Which is what, exactly, for the listener?
Syncretism is the blending and absorbing of different religious beliefs and practices over time. Hilarion uses this concept as a sledgehammer to dismantle Anthony's belief in Christian uniqueness.
He brings the receipts.
He really does. Hilarion explicitly points out the historical overlap. He reminds Anthony that the supposedly Christian emperor Constantine still adores Apollo. He points out that the concept of a divine trinity already existed in the ancient Samothracian mysteries.
Right. None of this is new.
He argues that Christian baptism mimics the ancient water rites of Isis, that the concept of redemption and blood sacrifice mimics the cult of Mithra, and that the veneration of the Virgin Mary is just an echo of the worship of Proserpine.
He is looking Anthony in the eye and saying, your religion is not a unique divine revelation dropped from the sky. It is a historical collage.
A patchwork quilt.
Yes. It is a quilt stitched together from the dying remnants of older, forgotten faith.
It is a brutal unmasking of religious history.
It's like walking through a massive museum of obsolete technology.
Oh, I love that analogy.
You walk through the halls and you see the progression from the abacus to the typewriter to the massive mainframe computers to the floppy disk.
Right, and you recognize that each one was essential for its time, but they're all useless now.
Exactly. But instead of technology, Anthony is walking through a museum of the foundational beliefs of billions of human beings.
And we see the Greek gods in a state of pathetic, agonizing decay. Apollo is whipping his horses, desperately trying to drive his chariot up into the realm of pure thought before he crashes into the abyss of forgotten memory.
It's tragic.
Venus is weeping, lamenting that her own followers have abandoned her, before she too falls into the void. They are out of belief, they are out of followers, and so they literally cease to exist.
They die because the human mind has moved on.
But the most shocking, the most philosophically provocative moment in this entire graveyard sequence is who appears next.
This is the big one.
Because Flaubert doesn't just show the death of pagan gods, which Anthony might be able to tolerate. Flaubert brings out Jehovah. He brings out the God of the Old Testament.
This is the Jehovah anomaly.
And when I read this, my jaw dropped.
Yeah, it's a huge swing.
Jehovah appears, and he delivers this terrifying, booming, thundering monologue. He boasts about his historical triumphs. He talks about pitching the tents of Jacob. He boasts about raining fire, brimstone down to burn the city of Sodom.
The classic Old Testament wrath.
He talks about drowning Pharaoh and his chariots in the Red Sea. He declares himself the jealous, supreme God who holds all other gods in absolute abomination. He sounds invincible.
And then
his voice begins to fade. The thunder dies away. And Jehovah becomes, as Flaubert writes, just the shadow of a god passing away forever.
The philosophical implications of Flaubert placing Jehovah, the foundational deity of the Judeo-Christian tradition, in the exact same fading, obsolete lineup as Jupiter and Isis are absolutely staggering.
It's so bold for the 19th century.
Flaubert is applying the exact same cold, historical, and anthropological lens to the living God of the West that Westerners so comfortably and arrogantly apply to the gods of antiquity.
It really forces some perspective.
By showing Jehovah as a passing hallucination, a cultural construct that had its fierce era of dominance but is now expiring, Flaubert is asking a deeply dangerous question.
Are all human attempts to categorize the divine just temporary sociological phenomena?
Exactly.
It perfectly aligns with that pop culture comparison mentioned in our sources, comparing this to the TV show Supernatural.
Oh, that's a fun connection.
Right. In that show, the main characters hunt demons, ghosts, and pagan gods all the time. They know for a fact that the supernatural machinery of the universe is real.
Right, the monsters are real.
But they constantly grapple with the absence or the utter indifference of a singular benevolent God. It's the unsettling idea that you can acknowledge the existence of supernatural forces or the reality of religious history without believing that there is a loving father figure sitting in the control room.
Exactly. Flaubert is forcing Anthony to confront a universe where Jehovah was very real to the ancient Israelites in the exact same psychological way that Jupiter was real to the ancient Romans.
But subjective reality does not equal eternal reality.
Right. Both gods had their era, and both are equally dead now, swallowed by time.
But this brings up a massive, glaring question about the text. If the Old Testament God Jehovah is treated as a passing myth, a dying echo, does Flaubert spare Jesus?
That's the logical next question.
Because Jesus is conspicuously absent from this massive graveyard sequence of dying deities.
That is a critical observation, and it heavily foreshadows the ambiguous ending of the text. Flaubert intentionally holds Jesus back from the graveyard.
But why?
The reason why is the central tension of the novel's climax. Does he spare Jesus out of traditional reverence, protecting the core of Christian faith? Or does he spare Jesus because Jesus represents a fundamentally different kind of truth? For Anthony, perhaps a truth rooted in matter rather than myth.
That is fascinating.
We don't get the answer immediately, because before Anthony can even process the death of Jehovah, Hilarion transforms one final time.
And this final transformation pushes us into the absolute limits of human sanity. With the ancient gods dead and buried, Hilarion sheds his human form entirely.
He's done playing the disciple.
He undergoes a terrifying metamorphosis. He grows so incredibly colossal that he towers up into the stars. He assumes this blinding, terrifying luminosity like Lucifer, the Lightbringer. But he doesn't announce himself as a demon.
No, he doesn't.
He announces himself as science.
This is the ultimate final pivot of the temptation. Hilarion realizes that destroying Anthony's specific theological construct isn't enough to break him.
Because he could just invent a new one.
Exactly. Anthony could always just invent a new theology. To truly break the ascetic, science must destroy Anthony's entire anthropocentric view of the universe.
The idea that humans are the main characters.
He must destroy the idea that humanity matters at all. So science lifts Anthony upon mighty wings and physically carries him off the Earth up into outer space.
This spaceflight sequence is just wild. We have to remember, Flaubert was writing this in the mid-19th century, long before space travel was a reality.
But he nails the cosmic dread.
He writes it exactly like a modern cosmic horror story. Anthony is borne away, far beyond the solar system. He sees the Milky Way. He sees the countless swirling galaxies of stars. He sees a universe that has absolutely no center, no top, no bottom, and no end. It is infinite.
And out there in the freezing void, science delivers what is essentially a devastating Spinozan philosophical argument.
Spinoza, can you give us some context on that?
Sure. Baruch Spinoza was a highly controversial 17th century philosopher who argued that God and nature are one and the same. Spinoza posited that God is the infinite, underlying substance of the universe itself, not a personal creator with a beard sitting on a throne making decisions.
Okay, so God is the universe.
Science explains this exact philosophy to Anthony with brutal, icy clarity.
Let's really unpack the logic of this Spinozan argument, because it is the intellectual hammer that completely shatters Anthony.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
Science looks at Anthony and says, God cannot possibly be a person. If God is truly infinite, he cannot experience emotions like anger or pity or love.
And the logic is airtight.
Why? Because to feel a desire, to want something, implies that you lack something.
Right.
If you desire love, you lack love. If you are angry, you lack justice. But if God is perfect and infinite, he lacks absolutely nothing. Therefore, he desires nothing. Therefore, he feels nothing.
It is a flawless, inescapable logical progression that completely annihilates the concept of a personal God who listens to prayers.
It just deletes the idea of a caring God.
Science argues that if God is infinite, his will is completely inseparable from his essence. He doesn't make conscious choices, he just is. Therefore, the universe doesn't have a purpose in any human sense of the word.
It's just a machine.
It wasn't built as a nursery for humanity. It operates on blind, indifferent, eternal laws of physics.
This is the absolute climax of intellectual despair. Space is limitless, and out there in the void, Anthony experiences what Flaubert describes as a hideous cold and a death deeper than death.
The existential chill.
The sheer concept of nothingness physically enters his consciousness. Anthony realizes that if the universe is truly infinite and completely indifferent, then his entire life has been a joke.
Everything he did was for nothing.
His 30 years of groaning in the dirt, his starving, his whipping, his desperate crying prayers, it might have all just gone out into an empty, echoing void that simply does not care.
Flaubert is perfectly capturing the deep existential dread of modern science. Think about the historical shift here.
The Enlightenment, right?
Yeah. When the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment pulled back the curtain on the cosmos, they revealed a universe governed by mathematics and astronomy, not by divine providence.
Which is terrifying.
If the Earth is just a microscopic, insignificant speck of dust floating in an infinite cold void, what happens to the meaning of human suffering? What does it mean for your morality, your pain, your hopes, if the universe fundamentally does not care about you?
Science tells Anthony that human perception is nothing more than a concave mirror that deforms reality.
A funhouse mirror.
We invent a god that looks and acts like a jealous human king, because that is the only way our tiny, deformed human brains can process the terrifying concept of the infinite.
We have to make it relatable.
But I have to push back on the framing here. Is science genuinely acting as the devil in this scene?
What do you mean?
Well, because everything science says to Anthony seems empirically demonstrably true. The universe is infinite. It doesn't have a center. Is the real enemy here science? Or is Anthony's real enemy his own bloated ego?
That is a very sharp point.
His ego demands that the supreme creator of the cosmos must care deeply about what a single dirty monk in the Egyptian desert eats for dinner.
That is the profound brilliance of Flaubert's vision. The devil in this final stage isn't a red guy with a pitchfork trying to make you steal or lie.
Right.
The devil is simply the cold, hard, objective reality of the physical universe stripping away human vanity. The terror for Anthony isn't that science is deceiving him. The absolute terror is that science is telling him the truth.
The universe is indifferent.
And Anthony's medieval mind simply cannot sustain that level of cosmic insignificance.
His consciousness literally begins to burst under the dilation of that nothingness. He is crushed by the infinite above him.
He has to escape.
And so, in a desperate, panicked attempt to escape the terrifying expanse of space and the unbearable burden of human thought, Anthony plunges back down. He's dropped back to Earth. Which brings us to the final bizarre sequence of the night, the descent into matter.
Having failed to find any comfort or meaning in the infinite heavens, Anthony seeks refuge in the absolute opposite extreme.
The ground.
He looks to the mindless, microscopic, heavy, grounded reality of the material world, but he finds that even here, reality has begun to completely fracture and break down.
The moment he hits the ground, he is immediately confronted by two towering personifications, lust and death.
The two big ones.
Lust appears as this incredibly beautiful, voluptuous woman who promises Anthony oblivion through extreme sensory pleasure. Death appears as a horrifying old woman with a skull-like face, promising him oblivion through the finality of suicide.
Both offering a way out.
They stand there arguing over who holds the ultimate power over humanity. And then, horrifically, they merge. They fuse into a single undulating, impossible monster, a giant skull crowned with roses, sitting on a voluptuous torso, with a burial shroud forming a long tail.
It is a grotesque but highly accurate symbol of the biological life cycle.
How so?
Desire leads to generation and birth. Generation inevitably leads to decay. Decay leads to death, and death fertilizes the ground for new life. It is an endless, mindless, churning biological engine, and this fusion initiates a total breakdown of physical form around Anthony.
Nothing is stable anymore. Next, Anthony witnesses an argument between the Sphinx and the Chimera.
Two very different mythological creatures.
The Sphinx is a massive stone creature representing immobile intellect, the mystery of form, gazing eternally and silently at the horizon. The Chimera is a chaotic beast representing imagination and caprice, constantly barking, flying, and shifting its shape.
And they fight.
They circle each other, but they can never capture each other. It's the eternal, frustrating conflict between hard reality and wild fantasy.
And then Flaubert unleashes a true menagerie of madness. A barrage of bizarre mythological beasts flood the desert.
And again, he didn't make these up.
No, Flaubert didn't just invent these. He drew them straight from the writings of the ancient Roman historian Pliny the Elder from his natural history.
The creatures are absurd but terrifying. Anthony sees the Cyopods, these bizarre men who have only one leg, but their single foot is so massive that they lie on their backs and use their foot as an umbrella to shield themselves from the desert sun.
Very practical.
He sees the Blemmyes men who have no heads at all, with their faces located directly on their chests. And the Blemmyes boast to Anthony about how happy they are because of their lack of complex thought and their perfect digestion.
They are the embodiment of pure physical existence without the burden of higher intellect. But the most striking and dangerous creature in this entire parade is the Catoplepas.
The Catoplepas. It's described as this black buffalo-like pig with a long, incredibly flaccid, weak neck.
So ugly.
Its head is so heavy that it just constantly drags its snout through the mud. It is the absolute epitome of sluggish, mindless, heavy matter. And it tells Anthony that anyone who looks directly into its pink, swollen, bloodshot eyes will instantly drop dead.
But there's a detail here that is so crucial.
What's truly amazing here, as the sources point out, is that out of all the hundreds of hallucinations, gods, and monsters Anthony's seen tonight, the Cataplepus is the only beast that addresses Anthony directly by his name.
The fact that the Cataplepus recognizes him and calls his name is highly symbolic.
Why?
This beast represents the ultimate crushing gravity of matter. It is the heavy, muddy pull of pure physical existence, devoid of any spiritual light or intellectual elevation. By calling his name, the beast is extending an invitation.
An invitation to what?
It is inviting Anthony to just give up the agonizing struggle of trying to be a conscious, thinking, believing human being. Just look into my eyes, die, and become mud.
And the crazy part is, Anthony wants to accept the invitation. He stands there and watches as the very boundaries of biology completely dissolve. Everything is melting. He sees plants turning into stones. He sees insects turning into blooming flowers. He sees diamonds gleaming like biological eyes. The firm boundary between animate life and inanimate matter completely breaks down.
Because he's losing his mind.
And Anthony is so incredibly exhausted. He has been intellectually beaten down by the heretics, by the graveyard of dead gods, by the terrifying infinity of space, and by the realization of his own insignificance. He hits this ecstatic, delirious peak of exhaustion.
He delivers a final monologue that is both hauntingly beautiful and deeply disturbing. Looking at the writhing matter around him, he cries out, "I long to swim, to fly, to bark, to descend to the very bottom of matter, be matter itself."
It is the ultimate fantasy of evolutionary regression. It reminds me of that modern internet meme, you know, the one, reject humanity, return to monk,
Oh, yes, absolutely.
where people joke about how stressful it is to pay taxes, to have a job, to have constant existential crises about the future, and they wish they could just devolve back into apes living simply in a forest.
Just eating bananas all day.
But Anthony is escalating that meme to a cosmic biological scale. He doesn't just want to be an ape. He wants to be a single cell.
He wants to go all the way back.
He wants to be a vibrating piece of inanimate matter so that he never ever has to think again. He wants to be completely free from the crushing, agonizing burden of human consciousness.
It is the final, most profound temptation. The temptation to simply cease being human. To surrender the mind entirely to the blind, mechanical, and different forces of nature. To seek peace in oblivion.
And just as he reaches this absolute peak of delirium, screaming his desire to become a literal microbe, the night finally ends.
The spell breaks.
The hallucinations break. The sun begins to rise over the Egyptian desert.
The ending of Flaubert's text is famously abrupt and incredibly ambiguous. The monsters vanish. The dead gods are gone. Anthony is left standing alone in the quiet dawn.
Just him in the dirt.
He looks down at the ground, and in the morning light, he sees tiny globular masses, microscopic life forms, essentially cells or microbes vibrating in the light of the sun.
And then suddenly, in the very center of the disk of the rising sun, the face of Jesus Christ beams down.
It's quite the image.
Anthony looks up, makes the sign of the cross, and simply resumes his daily prayers. The end. That's the end of the book.
Which leaves the reader with a massive, lingering question that we absolutely must unpack.
We have to.
What exactly is Flaubert doing with this final image? Is he directly equating the biological reality of cells, the microscopic building blocks of life, with the face of Christ?
That is the million-dollar question that defines the entire journey. Is this a traditional victory for faith?
Did he win?
Did Anthony successfully resist the devil, endure the dark night of the soul, and finally earn a comforting vision of his Savior? Or did Anthony just find God in the scientific, molecular, empirical reality of matter, rather than in the abstract, rigid theology of the Orthodox Church?
Did science and religion just perfectly merge in the lens of a microscope?
Exactly.
If we look back and integrate the Spinozan argument that science made out in space, the argument that God is the infinite underlying substance of the universe itself, then seeing Christ shining through the microscopic building blocks of life is a profound philosophical reconciliation.
So God is matter.
In this reading, God isn't a bearded man sitting on a throne in the sky demanding that you whip yourself. God is the vibrating infinite energy of matter itself. Anthony has survived the complete traumatic deconstruction of his medieval worldview, and he has found a way to see the divine present in the empirical reality of nature.
It makes the ending incredibly relevant to us today. If we tie Anthony's entire excruciating journey back to the modern listener's experience of information fatigue, the parallels are striking.
Because we are dealing with the same thing.
We are bombarded every single day by infinite perspectives, We have access to the beliefs of every culture that has ever existed. We are constantly confronted by scientific truths about the vastness of space or the mechanisms of biology that make us feel agonizingly small and insignificant.
It's exhausting.
And we constantly face that temptation to just tune out of consciousness, to scroll endlessly on our phones, to let our minds go numb and return to matter. But Anthony's survival at the end of the text suggests a different path.
It suggests that we cannot escape back into the comfortable ignorance of the past, and we cannot devolve into mindless microbes.
We must learn to live with the overwhelming, contradictory complexity of the modern world.
We have to find a way to integrate the sheer terror of the infinite universe with our human necessity for meaning. Anthony resumes his prayers not because he has logically disproved science, he hasn't.
The logic still stands.
Right. He resumes them because he has survived the encounter with science. He has found a new, resilient equilibrium.
So as we wrap up this massive deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought.
Let's hear it.
Think about all the things Anthony saw in that desert. He saw the heresiarchs with their snakes and moon souls. He saw the graveyard of dying gods. He saw the cold Spinozan universe of indifferent physics. And he saw the microscopic cells vibrating in the sun.
He saw it all.
If every single piece of human knowledge, every myth we tell, every religious doctrine we enforce, and even the scientific method itself is just a lens through which we view the terrifying infinity of the universe, what happens when you realize that the lens itself is part of the illusion?
Oh, wow.
Can the human mind ever truly see reality without a filter, without a story, without a framework? Or are we destined to just keep swapping out the lenses, age after age, desperately hoping the next one gives us a clearer picture of the sun?
It raises a vital question about the nature of our own modern certainty. If Flaubert's Library of Dreams teaches us anything, it is that our most deeply held, violently defended truths are often just the specific, temporary illusions of our era.
Which brings us right back to that small room in France in 1849. You can almost see Flaubert, his voice hoarse, his throat burning after 17 continuous hours of reading, staring at his exhausted friends.
The friends who told him to burn it.
They told him to put it in the fire because it was too chaotic, too dense, too deeply unsettling. It wasn't the neat, binary, triumphant narrative they wanted. It was the muddy, terrifying, overwhelming reality of the human mind desperately trying to swallow the universe. And thank God he didn't burn it.
Indeed. He left the fire burning on the page, waiting for the rest of us to finally be ready for it.